I've played a lot of games, and when we talk about PC games, while there is a finite amount of games out there, the chance of me experiencing all of them probably not going to happen, not in my lifetime at least. But I have played plenty, and as you all know, there are good ones and there are bad ones. Now the games that we're going to talk about today made me want to French kiss a snapping turtle. These aren't the worst games on the PC, but they come pretty close to me. And bear in mind that this is just an opinion. You might love these games, and if you do, I can't take that away from you. So keep an open mind, let's have fun. Let's begin. We all have games that we remember vividly seeing but never playing. For me, that was Jackal. I had friends who played it, I think I saw it in an older arcade, and I've seen tons of my peers play it on Twitch, but I had never taken the time to check it out. That all changed during my Konami conquest that I had last year. Jackal was one of their early NES games coming out on the Famicom Disk System after it was successful in the arcades. By the way, did you know that Jackal in the arcades ran on modified double dribble hardware? True story. The game is simple. We control a Jeep and that Jeep destroys everything. It's a wonderfully fun NES game. And you know what you should do if you have an awesome arcade game that is running successfully on home consoles? You should put it on the computer. And you should choose someone who is badass at porting things, which is exactly the fucking polar opposite of what Banana Development is capable of doing. Just have some idiot rip a fat ass blast in a microphone and hell yeah. That's a Jeep roar, by the way. Hope you're ready to hear that because that's the only thing you will hear. What's crazy to me is that compared to the other Banana Development games, this one is actually playable, but that means nothing. This game is still fucking horrible. A few months ago, one of my moderators, DivineShadow_18, redeemed an override and made me play Fossil Fuel. Now, Fossil Fuel is what happens when an overzealous fanboy of both Dino Crisis and Resident Evil wakes up one day and decides that he's gonna make a game in Unity. And that's what it felt like, a weird asset flip survival horror FPS that was chock full of absurdities and other assorted shenanigans. But at the end of the day, it was playable. And I appreciate the idea of keeping the interest in dinosaurs relevant. I too, still to this day, prefer dinosaur chicken nuggets over the regular ones. I get it. But then the sequel came out and everything I disliked made a return. And this time it was on the Unreal Engine, which meant that the developer could add an incomprehensible amount of visual effects that really slow down the game. Combat is repetitive, the atmosphere is hit or miss, and ultimately it felt like a hallway simulator with dinosaurs. I find that many indie developers that tackle Unreal Engine fall short in the optimization department. I might not have the best computer out there, but I didn't skimp on my hardware, so playing a game and having it start acting dreadful about 3 hours into it is incredibly frustrating. I'm sure the game is better on consoles, but I would avoid it on the computer unless you have a cutting-edge PC. Oh hey, Lego Island, you remember that one? Fun fact, the first Lego game ever was on the Sega Pico. You remember that? It was this cool educational console that had a yellow touchpad, and we had this pen that we could use to interface with the games. I had a few myself, and I do still collect Pico stuff, but the first game? $800 on a good day. Also, only released in Japan. But the second game was the one that many people knew, Lego Island, a really janky open-world adventure game created by Mindscape. We can do whatever we want, race a car, help the police, build things, or we can follow a very specific special mission that provides an ending. Now this game is important in the scope of the Lego franchises because it was successful, but Lord have mercy is it rigid, janky, and slow. In a few short years, the games would get so much better, but this one, it's worth passing on. You know how I say the games that we play place us in roles that we would likely never be? Police Simulator Police Duty is exactly that. Now this isn't a game I would rationally play because if I wanted to follow policy and have a game that actually worked, I'd play SWAT 4, or any of the Police Quest games. Because the meat and bones of those games involve proper police procedure. Sure, it isn't the most realistic, but it does the job. Now this game, it is literally a police officer simulator. We go out on a job, we do asinine tasks that consume our time, like driving around looking for a needle in a haystack, and occasionally we have missions to do, like take down a car from a robbery. But even then, that consists of ramming into a car 30 times to get it to stop. The physics in this game drove me batshit insane, and as time went on, the developers stopped supporting it. So now it's just a buggy mess that rarely works. If you get the game to run, you'll be lucky to complete a single day in the game. If you want more bang for your buck, maybe try flashing lights. It's basically the same thing, but eons better. I love Tetris. Tetris has been a huge part of my life for as long as I can remember. Some of you might have even seen me play it with my grandmother recently. When she stopped by, we streamed it, and we had a blast checking out all of these variations of Tetris throughout the years. But one that really disappointed my grandmother was Super Tetris. And let me tell you something, it takes a lot to disappoint that woman. I'm her grandson. So why does this one suck? Well, it's Tetris, but there's bombs in the middle. This was an idea that Bulletproof Software would cash in on the future with a game called Bombless, but this version is just rough. We have a very skinny field where half of it is comprised of tetraminos, and we get bombs that clear the lines. But we have limited tetraminos, and I get the idea of making Tetris variances stand out, but Tetris is one of the greatest games of all time. Overcomplicating it really just ruins the whole fun factor. This is one to pass on. Out of all of the games on the list today, this might be the one that makes you say, "Who hurt you, Forte?" And the answer to that is Eidos. It's always been Eidos. A company that somehow manages to publish games with the most interesting characters that somehow manage to exist in a world chocked to the brim with bullshit. I would rather sit through a 10-hour lecture about the history of wallpaper patterns than ever play Thief Gold again. Now, Thief Gold is the expanded version of Thief: The Dark Project. It was developed by Looking Glass Studios, the same folks who did System Shock and Ultima Underworld. It's a massively important game because it was the first stealth game to incorporate light and sound as gameplay mechanics. The AI was interesting, and Thief walked so other stealth games could run. I won't deny that. But the problem is, the game is just boring as fuck. The whole idea is that we play as Garrett, who at some point belonged to some secret order, but said, "Adios, motherfucker," and left. And now he's being targeted by some ridiculous guy named Ramirez. And what that translates to is running around places aimlessly while avoiding dying in the most infuriating ways possible, with some of the most rigid mechanics I've ever had in a game that allowed me to walk forward. This game was not for me, but it might be for you. But damn, man, whew, I did not like this. Oh boy, Top Gun. The one movie I can always count on someone mentioning to me when they ask what branch of service I was in and I tell them I was in the Air Force. Never fails. I'm used to it. I just smile and I nod and I walk away, briskly. Top Gun was a badass movie. I remember watching it with my dad, and there were a few things I learned from that movie. A, the Navy has badass airplanes. B, the Righteous Brothers are really good singers. C, officers are douchebags no matter what branch you're in. And D, Kelly McGillis was really fucking hot in the 80s. In fact, one of my first PS2 games that my dad bought me was Top Gun Combat Zones, which is dreadful, but he loved it, and that's all that matters, right? Most of you might recall Top Gun on the NES, which isn't really a bad game, it's just Afterburner from Konami, right? But if we went all the way back to where the franchise began, you'd have Ocean Software's Top Gun. Complete with 4 colors, pink, black, light blue, and white, and that's all you're ever gonna see. The game is slow, choppy. This was from an era where flight sims were not doing well. It would take some time for them to be reasonable, but if you're looking for an example of what not to do with a flight sim, look no further than this one. Now what blows my mind is that the Commodore 64 version looks like this. Where did we go wrong? When did we stray so far from God? Ocean didn't care that this game looked like this. The Amstrad CPC version figured it out. It's like they knew people would buy it, so screw them. If you've been a fan of this channel for at least the last year, you'll know I absolutely hate Tomb Raider. I bought them all on the PS1 thinking they were so great because they get talked up all the time. And I remembered them from my childhood and from my earliest Google image searches. If you know, you know. But as an adult, I went back and checked out Tomb Raider 1, and I didn't like it. Platforming and tank controls really don't mesh well in my opinion, and core design made a franchise out of it. Which is infuriating because the first, 4 games are all like that? But what is unfinished business? It's a DLC, or more so an expansion, and I want to tell you what this is about, but it's more like a level pack. There is zero, and I mean zero, relevance to the plot other than the environments we're in. So if the bumps and ridges on your brain weren't stimulated enough by the bullshit of Tomb Raider 1, you can enjoy even more levels that somehow manage to be worse. And what's even more infuriating is that the levels slog on. It's a chore. It's been a long time since I talked about Delta Force. The only reason I played it was because at the time we were doing a System Shock on Xbox, a project where I focus on games that I own, and I did a parlay for some weird Delta Force Xbox game that I have, and as such, I was whipping out the Windows 98 virtual machine to get that hunk of shit working. Some of the issues I had with it mainly involved enemies that had binoculars for eyes. They could see you across the map, and because the game relies on the greatest sin of the FPS genre, hit scanning, you would randomly die without any idea of who took you out. So when it came time to play Delta Force 2, I was hoping they fixed it. But gauging by the fact that it's on this list, you can probably deduce that they didn't fix shit. The game feels the exact same, and the same exact issues exist. The whole game uses voxels, right, instead of pixels. Let's do some quick game development talk real quick. When we play games, many of them have pixels. That is to say, in a rasterized image, it consists of small squares that are flat. They're the building blocks of images. Each pixel has a color, and together they create a whole picture. Then you have voxels, which are the same thing, but instead of it being a square, it's a cube, 3D building blocks. Because they're 3D, it's easy to provide depth in your imagery. Delta Force uses a proprietary voxel engine that has shading and all these fancy nonsensical things that change in relation to how you see it. So what you might think is a tree could really be like 13 dudes looking directly at you, ready to launch bullets at your face, and that gets old really quickly. In a previous episode, I mentioned that early Games Workshop PC games didn't really fare well. I wasn't a fan of how they took the board game and ported it directly to the PC with the premise that you would need to know how to play the game verbatim. That was an issue with Hero Quest, and it was an issue with Space Crusade. Hero Quest would eventually lead to Warhammer Fantasy, Space Crusade would lead to Warhammer 40k. I wanted to continue to check out Warhammer 40k because I adore the lore, right? The lore of Warhammer 40k is something beautiful, and I love learning about it. So what came out after Space Crusade? Space Hulk, another board game. This time we're going up against the Tyranids, specifically the Tyranid Gene Stealers. We control a fire team of 4 Space Marines, and we guide them through specific objectives. So what's the problem? The same problem as most adaptations. The rules have to be understood verbatim, or else you will have a really bad time quickly. I didn't know it was a board game, so I played it as a turn-based FPS. But no, these Space Marines have 0 spatial awareness, so you constantly have to be giving them commands because you will die and you will be frustrated. And it's beyond irritating to me that the characters we don't control become organic mouth breathers who will watch their friends die. Maybe I'm the weird one here, but I can't get into board game ports. They really aren't for me. And that's it for today's episode. What did you think about this list? Are there any PC games you feel are just beyond bad? Feel free to let us know down in the comments below. This is a great opportunity to share a laugh and remember these horrible mistakes in video gaming history. So if you made it to the end of this episode, you're already home in our community. We're a group of individuals who love remembering a time when life was just a little bit easier to live. And if that's something you align with, feel free to join us. Finally, the single most important thing you can do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly affects the visibility of the videos and the projects that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes. Fortefyre out.